General Weygand has called the Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Welcome to the Lead Pursuit Podcast, a podcast covering Blood Red Skies, a game of World War II aerial combat. Welcome to episode 12 of the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Tonight's episode is a little bit different. It's not so formatted. We kind of ramble on, but that's okay. We'll be talking about tactics, we'll be talking about gameplay, we'll be talking about how you set up and how you hopefully win your games of Blood Red Skies. With that, I'll turn it over to the team, to Brett and to Mitch. Yes, we brought him back from the No Dice, No Glory podcast so that we can all talk tactics tonight. For bombers, are bombers, parentheses, multi-engine aircraft susceptible to tailing? Now, at this point, it says, under the special rules state they are unaffected by tailing. However, this only applies to bombers until they've dropped their bombs. Then they act as multi-engine aircraft and ignore the special rules. Multi-engine aircraft can be tailed as a general rule, but when acting as laden bombers in the bomber escort scenario, they can't.
Does that make sense?
So we've played it both ways. And, I guess my opinion as the bomber pilot in all of the scenarios may not be worth it. But we played it in one scenario where you could tail a bomber automatically, where you didn't have to knock him down with hits. And that felt really unfair because you have zero maneuverability as one of these four-engine bombers anyway. So if a guy is directly behind you, you can't dodge. So, because that's an interesting point when you look at it and you go, okay, if you're a multi-engine aircraft, when can you dodge shots? And there's still some kind of disagreement about that, because theoretically, regardless of whether you're a bomber or not, if you have zero maneuverability, you have zero dice for maneuver in a dodge from direct to head or direct to stern. Side, obviously, you're able to use your speed and use that as your dice. But it's kind of I think when you look at a laden aircraft and you say, okay, he's not going to be able to do anything anyway. Can I just immediately tail him and disadvantage him? I think that's a pretty heavy penalty. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I play it differently with the BFs, the Mosquitoes, the more agile ones. But I mean, I don't know if you guys have used four-engine bombers.
Yeah, we used our B-29 cards that we came up with for our MiG Alley scenarios.
Now, while I was never in the Luftwaffe, I know that a rear attack was not the preferred attack on B-17s or B-24s.
Exactly.
Because you're looking at tail gunner and ball gunner making your day pretty bad. The other one too is you're moving with the aircraft.
Absolutely.
So you're a target the entire time. So when I've done demo games with, the bomber must get through, I'm like, as soon as you're hit, you go to disadvantaged on the bomber if you're tailing it.
Right.
And a lot of it was, I made the audible, but doctrinally, they used to use slash attacks, diving attacks, head-on attacks till they threw all the machine guns up front. But tailing was not something that even the Japanese, who had not as robust air doctrine as the Germans, didn't tail B-29s when they were able to find them.
Right. And I don't think there is a sufficiently damaging way to kill a fighter immediately for rolling in right on your six. And Brett, pitch in on this because your MiGs were back there shooting at my B-29s a lot. Even with 4 total firepower dice and the ability to get a critical, that still only took you from advantaged to neutral.
It took a long time to get those B-29s to slow down and lose some firepower.
Yeah, and so, but I'm saying even when you were back there and I'm shooting at you, I'm not able to take a fighter out. I'm able to rack up some boom chits, but I'm not able to get rid of that guy that's sitting at my 6 o'clock pounding away. So it didn't feel so much like I could I could cause him to get shot down, which was kind of a weird loop, because the reason it worked out for us was because we're flying jets versus 4-engine bombers. He could, Brett could never slow down enough to just hang out behind me. And so as a result, he always had to kind of fly past, turn back around, do a head-on shot, fly past, turn back around, do a tail-on shot. But other than occasionally racking up boom chits on the fighter, I wasn't shooting it down, because it wasn't in a point where it was already disadvantaged and then taking another follow-on hit.
Once you started taking boom chits on that aircraft, you lost firepower, so that diminished your
right. So that's the other thing you have to remember, is every time you take a boom chit, you're losing a firepower die in each of your arcs. So
your interlocking fire card made a difference. So that was pretty devastating.
Well, and the funny thing is, you roll out there and you read the errata, and interlocking fire is now a discard, not a remove. And I'm like, oh, that would have been nice, because I would have played that every turn.
Even harder.
Yeah, exactly. But once again, so let's still go back to that. I have to basically mask the firepower of all the bombers, all two that we had at that point, all the bombers on one fighter to have a chance of even shooting him down. That doesn't quite feel realistic, because he's kind of camped at my 6 o'clock. Because if you think about it, so he's advantaged. Bomber number 1 shoots at him and is able to knock him to neutral. And then bomber number 2 shoots at him, knocking him to disadvantaged. And the only luck we have there is because there's other jets to keep him from regaining advantage. At some point, he flies out in front of the bombers and they take their standard shot at him.
Well, we know Andy Chambers listens to the show. And that's something, it was easy for me to call an audible on the 4-engine bombers, because I feel that it's missing from the rules.
Right.
And it's like almost we're shoehorning the rules into, because I think that's a fun mission when you put those big 4-engine babies on the table and, you're just taking fighter passes at it. I would play the tailing different. I would say that, look, if you get hit in the tailing position of a bomber, you get a boom chit, you should immediately go disadvantage, even if you dodge it.
So we did that, and obviously, like I said, we played. You couldn't dodge, fore and aft shots, because you never get to add your pilot skill as that multi-engine airplane. But Brett will tell you that even with 2 bombers, 6 MiGs, we got all the way to turn 6 before he got a bomber even close to shot down.
Which is, if it's that story that I was reading about how badly the B-29 suffered against the MiGs. So maybe look at a homebrew rule that fits it better.
Well, and there's one of the scenarios that I've written up kind of takes some leeway away from the bomber player in that as soon as the bomber loses an engine, it has to break formation. Because once again, the way the Korea missions were flown was very different than World War II. And that at a certain point when, and I don't want to say it was a low risk mentality, but there had already been so many bomber casualties that it was, if you're that badly hit, you're not going to the target area, because in the target area, you have flak and fighters trying to kill you.
Yeah.
So the way we were opting to play it was that the victory conditions really is what drove your success, rather than having to kill all the bombers, which is the way the victory conditions are currently in that bomber scenario. So what we said is if bombers don't exit,
half or more, right?
Yeah. Well, for the, let me make sure I read this one right. So let me flip back to the bomber escort scenario. So victory, half or more of the bombers exit the opposite table edge is how it was written, which then it changes because they changed that to be a 6-turn game. So it's no longer exiting the other table edge. At that point, then let me read it right here. The special rules. It basically, if half or more of the bombers survive with bombs still on board by turn 6, or at the end of turn 6.
Yeah,
so
I remember we had 2 bombers. I just had to shoot down 1 before we got to 6. That's what I remember.
Yeah, but to me, it's a real important distinction, because if you force the bombers to break off, you don't end up in the situation where you're continually throwing fighters at a bomber who may do like I was doing, hit a cloud and suddenly climb up, and now he's back to neutral. So I think there's a point to be said in there that if you can at least reward the fighter player for getting a bomber to lose an engine, it peeling off, at least in a Korea scenario, and then you kind of start trying to strip the other ones down. And the real victory is, can you get anything off the far end? Not necessarily half, but do you get anything to the target area?
All right, right.
But like you said, Mitch, I think people are sometimes afraid to house rule those kind of things, which, quite frankly, ought to be house ruled.
Yeah. I mean, you have such an active community, and I love playing with the big. I have a Lank and a B-17, and I want to get a B-29, especially for Korea. House rules work great. Andy Chambers and the guys from Warlord are not going to come to your house and take your toys away.
Exactly.
Well, maybe they would. John Russell.
John will show up and take our cool painted bombers.
That'd be kind of neat if he did that.
I wonder if there's some relevance to like a critical dodge mechanic
for the bombers.
Yeah, where they have to have a critical dodge. 2 successes on a roll, or I don't remember how many dice you'd be rolling, but if we're talking about how would you change it to make it you make them go down faster in lieu of like an automatic, instead of doing automatic tailing or changing tailing mechanics for laden bombers, change the dodge. Well, they don't dodge anyway, right? They don't do a dodge.
Well, they can dodge if it's a deflection shot. So that was kind of the thing to remember, is that they at least get their speed. They don't get pilot skill, but they can dodge with speed.
What was the mechanic that was negating heavy hitter? Was it the deflection shot mechanic that was making heavy hitter not relevant? I remember thinking that when we were playing, like I had heavy hitter, but it didn't matter on a bunch of shots on the bombers. I don't remember how.
I'm trying to remember as well, because it was had to do with critical hits, but I don't remember if there was anything. There's nothing specific in there that would take away your ability to get critical hits.
Right, because with a critical hit, you need 2.
Oh, no, I know what it was. It was because we were shooting fore and aft, because it didn't matter. If you got a critical hit, who cares? You're not taking away any dodge dice, because I already have 0
Oh,
dodge dice.
That's right. Yeah, 0 dodge dice. That's right. So, yeah, basically made that be ineffectual. It'd be neat if you could have, because I'm thinking back. Remember we watched that RAF video? It was a training video on how to attack B-29. Yeah, still don't understand the rationale behind that. But yeah, it was a really cool video. It was actually like a declassified RAF training video where they had actual footage of meteors flying against formations of B-29s with really pretty detailed instructions and stuff on what they were trying to accomplish. And basically it was head-on passes at high speed and basically stay away from the tail,
Yeah.
And that was the ideal pass was a high speed head-on pass from a slightly higher altitude, flying above the bomber stream, and then singling out, I guess, disabled bombers. And it was pretty neat. And when we played it, that really wasn't possible because there was no advantage for a head-on. And I ended up being behind the aircraft all the time because I'd have to turn back and, turn around because the jets are so fast.
How fast was the B-29 speed? I never saw a card on it.
Move 7. And then so it became moves. I think I've got it right here. Either move 7 or move 8, then followed by, losing 1 for being a bomber. So let me look at my card. I should know it by heart. I only played it like for an entire 2.5 days. So it was maneuver 0, speed 7, 354 miles an hour.
And how many?
So its firepower was, so it was basically a 360 with firepower 2 and a rear of +2. So you had negative, 0 base firepower, turret 360 and rear +2. So 4 in the rear is not insignificant, because that once again does give you a chance to get a critical hit, making something hard for that fighter to dodge. But even if he doesn't dodge, all he does is go down an advantage level. He doesn't become a smoking hole because he isn't shooting you as disadvantaged. I guess is where it comes down to.
Well, that firepower goes away quick once they start taking boom chits. It's not
exactly.
4
And so
dice anymore.
all of a sudden, when I've taken two boom chits, I have just basically 2 firepower.
I'll tell you,
So.
I think playing around with the rules and play testing may be a good idea.
I think there, and it's kind of something I think I've seen looking through most of the posts in the Ready Room is that there's a lot of people playing fighters and there's a few people playing twin engine bombers, but other than people buying and painting them, I have not seen, I think I've only seen one game with B-17s out there. So I'd be really curious to kind of get the pulse of the community on what they feel their experience is with, heavy bombers, medium and heavy bombers out there. So out there, anyone who's actually played these a bunch of times, let us know what you think, because I think there's probably some tweaks that could be made, once again, like we said, to make things a little deadlier in the rear arc and to force the fighters to do more slashing attacks and things that might match up more with what actually happened out there.
Well, that mission, that escort mission was not easy though, from a MiG standpoint. I mean, it was just to reiterate, we were MiGs versus B-29s, 6 MiGs, and you had, did you have 4?
Had
Sabres?
4 Sabres, had 2 in close. Actually, sorry, I had 6 Sabres. I had 6 Sabres with 2 in close escort and 4 in high cover that couldn't come in. And once again, that rule has changed a little as well between how it reads in the book, because it used to be that they couldn't show up until the first boom chit had been awarded. And then they basically changed it and said, no, let the high cover come in at the end of turn 1 or after the first turn, which is probably a little bit early for a jet because I'll get right across the board. But it kind of makes sense for a high cover with the slower airplanes.
It was not easy, though. My recollection of that third mission we did is it was everything I could do to get that bomber knocked down. And on turn 6, I was 1 dice away from pulling it off. But it was super fun, but certainly still a big challenge, when you consider the escorts, and of course we're talking jets. So like Doug said, they got up across the board super fast and knocked me down and that kind of thing. But I put all of my
jets, right?
Yeah, it was fun. In fact, I keep thinking it's going to make me better at playing my 110s specifically. I think some of the mechanics with that, not being able to climb for advantage has helped me probably maybe be a little better how I should play my otherwise disadvantaged, or I shouldn't say disadvantaged because that has different meanings, right, in this game, but my not so great BF 110s. Not so maneuverable.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of it does transfer because you learn to start thinking about what you're going to do to regain advantage rather than assuming you're going to regain advantage, kind of like you do when you're out there with regular single engine fighters and have the ability to do what you want, not have the jet card counteracting any of your climb for advantage or any of those other maneuvers. Okay, so let's change over real quick. Take a break, and we'll talk a little bit about game setup and about the different board setups and the different ways of looking at the game and how that's changed a little bit from what's in the box to what's kind of now the way to set up the game.
Talked a lot. I want to interrupt a little bit because we talked a lot about twin engine, but we were talking really the whole time just about bombers and but there's a big difference between the escort missions and laden bombers and stuff, and maybe tactics and stuff for just twin engine fighters.
Correct. So let's then jump to that one and let's talk about agile aircraft because once again, there's a couple different cards that'll be out there. So let me reach over to my box of cards.
I found that really, really confusing the first time we played. It was not intuitive, really. It was like, wait, what? Unless they're agile, they do what? They can't what?
Well, yeah, and so it all depends, I think, on whether you're looking at the kind of multi-engine cards you started the game with, or the kind that you get as you start buying more airplanes, like the BF 110, the Mosquito, and things like that. Because those kind of aircraft, the twin engine fighters, will have the agile trait, and the agile trait helps nullify some of the bad deals of being a twin engine bomber out there. So like if you go out there and you're looking at a Dornier 1.7, has all these standard multi-engine traits, but it doesn't have agile. So while it can't be outmaneuvered, it also can't outmaneuver somebody because it doesn't have the agile trait. So that's
just a bullet catcher.
Yeah, exactly. And the other part about it is if you don't have the agile trait, as we alluded to talking about the B-29s, you don't get to add your pilot skill. So basically it says if you're a regular multi-engine airplane, not agile, you just get your maneuver value or your speed value, whatever you're dodging or making, any attempt to break that, firing solution there. So whether it's speed plus pilot skill, maneuver plus pilot skill. Now, a lot of the multi-engines have a maneuver of 0 until you get to the fighters where you have a maneuver of 1. So it's or 2 sometimes. So it starts kind of ratcheting up there a little bit.
And I always, and I'll talk about the Mosquito a little bit. That is such a fast, agile plane, but it doesn't play that way in the game.
Okay. I own a bunch of them. I haven't played them yet. I don't even have them painted yet. I'm working on that.
Doug, do you have P-38s or twin Mustangs yet? I know you have a card
I got twin Mustangs, and I've been working on those. And that's a whole nother interesting discussion about multi-engine when we come to the twin Mustang. But Mitch, what's kind of your experience with the Mosquito? Because looking at it, I mean, it's multi-engine, agile. They originally gave it deep pockets. They changed that.
It has heavy hitter.
Right.
I couldn't find a lot of accounts of the Mosquito in air-to-air combat. They just didn't use it for that. But when you read accounts, they always felt that it could hold its own. So, you just wonder how it would do dogfighting. It was just so maneuverable. The thing is, it could not take a hit.
Well, and when you look at the stats, and if we just let me find my Mark IV, because I pulled up the Mark II card there. But there you go. There's my 4s. So if you look at the Mosquito, Mark 6s, if I get my numbers right here, the fighter bomber variant, it's agile. Like I said, heavy hitter and great climb have been added. It's a 328 airplane. So that's a pretty good fighter, and multi-engine airplanes aren't going to have a whole lot of disadvantages as long as they have agile. Right. I mean, it's basically going to be able to absorb more boom chits. It's going to, slowly start losing speed, but once again, you're shooting down 2 airplanes in that sense. So it's kind of has to lose some kind of ability. But I don't think, other than the fact that a Mosquito that is getting tailed can't do anything about it because it's only forward firepower. Well, because that was how it was designed. Right. But it is a 3 with heavy hitter. So that will tend to ruin some people's day when it acts like a regular fighter.
I don't know. I never met a Mosquito pilot, but if I had a Mosquito and there was even a chance of me getting tailed, I can outclimb any plane in World War II pretty much.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And so that's one of the interesting compressions, as Andy's talked about stat compression and ability compression, that's simulated by Great Climb, but Great Climb doesn't really help you in a bad situation. It helps you either preempt one, it helps you get from a really terrible situation to a moderately bad situation. But if you're getting tailed, it still doesn't get that dude away from you.
Yeah.
So it's one of those interesting kind of tactics fallouts of compressing the realism of the game, which is fine because I personally don't want to be tracking energy levels and climb rates and all those kind of things. But you just have to realize that the Mosquito has to resort to more conventional tactics in managing its arcs to be able to throw somebody out of the out of its tail arc.
Mm-hmm. How do we manage that? When I had the 110s against the Spitfires, once I got tailed, it was just time until it was dead because there's no way to escape that.
So that's an interesting part of the rules that I wanted to bring up because it's not well described. So we kind of house ruled that one, and we kind of house ruled it in the favor of the defender. Mitch, because if you guys have had this situation where you're tailing an aircraft and you're directly behind him, so if he turns 45 at his next move, the best he can do is put the seam of his two arcs on you as the fighter. And generally, there's nothing you can do without burning advantage and doing some kind of turn away, whatever kind of maneuver. So the best he can do is shift that 45 degrees. What Brett and I house ruled is that whenever you're on a seam of an arc, you take the most disadvantageous arc to you. And I realize that it leaves a lot of interpretation. But once again, that means if you're on the seam and you're attacking a bomber and he's shooting at you, then he gets his rear firepower. If you are on the seam and you're shooting at the bomber, then all of a sudden it becomes a deflection shot rather than being a tailing shot. Because, once again, there was no way to turn 46 degrees to take a guy who was tailing you out of your tail arc. So we basically said, all right, if we have managed our aircraft positioning well enough that I can do that, that you're exactly on that seam, we're going to consider you no longer tailing.
And that's the only time where you would be on the seam.
Exactly, because any other time there's going to be a couple degrees, and so generally you could turn into that aircraft 45 degrees, and you're going to throw your arc well off of it. But it's that one time when he is dead six on you, no matter what you do, you can't get out of there. And I have been that guy that has been unable to shake a bandit. But in this game, with as compressed as it is, and your inability to do things once you're disadvantaged, it kind of doesn't leave a disadvantaged fighter any options other than a wingman to come save him from getting shot down.
Yeah.
That might have been a strategy too. It would be maybe separate those two aircraft a bit more instead of keeping them right together. I think like they were maybe in one game I'm remembering where they got disadvantaged and were tailed, and it was they were just turning until the game, until they were shot down. Separate them so that one aircraft could be a wingman potentially to disrupt that tailing situation in the first place.
Well, and that goes to why I think a lot of people, when they build their initial setup, they don't necessarily think through how they want to set up, and they set everyone up in a line, and they don't think about changing speeds, changing the angles in order to quickly get into a position where a wingman is covering you. Now, the other things that you can't forget, though, that just because you're getting tailed, let's assume he is not advantaged and you are disadvantaged. Let's assume he's only neutral. So he's just slightly better than you. He's neutral. You're disadvantaged. He took a shot at you for whatever reason, managed not to shoot you down. You dodged. But then you get into your next turn. Remember, you can still do a pilot action of an outmaneuver. So while it would be, instead of you climbing for advantage, if you have an ace who's being tailed by a skill 2, you could automatically knock him to disadvantaged. All right. Mm-hmm. So that adds some possibilities. Now, once again, you're doing that for a pilot action instead of climbing for advantage or anything like that. Shooting, obviously, you're disadvantaged. You're not going to shoot anyone else. But there always is that, or the active desperation of, rather than trying to climb up at the end, even if you're lower skill, just make the guy roll and see if you can outmaneuver him, and it takes that tailing away. But at least it keeps you from going for the, I've made my maneuver, I'm going to climb for advantage, you're going to tail me, I'll be back down disadvantaged. All right. It kind of puts an end to that, at least for a little bit.
Hey, I want to bring up one more twin engine point.
Sure.
And it's something that bothered me with the P-38J card. I get it.
Let me dig up my card here.
Yeah. I went and pulled out my book. I get it had two engines, but why? I don't understand why they just couldn't play it as one engine. It didn't have much of an airframe. It fought really as a single engine fighter. I just, as much as I would love to put that in the game and, paint the plane like Pudgy or something, because of the multi-engine rules, I'm probably not going to do that unless I find some really great looking P-38s.
Well, I'll be curious, because I have not played P-38s specifically as fighters, because I'm looking at how different it is from the 110. I need to play some of these agile twin engines that have no rear turret. because I know there was enough times, even as a 110, when I came in offensive, I needed to be able to shoot things that were behind me. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because once again, it should still be fairly capable because it is agile. It's got heavy hitter and great dive. The real problem becomes once somebody gets back behind him, what is it going to do? Now, it should be no different than any other fighter. He's going to have the same problem where he's going to need to turn away, burn some advantage if he has it, hopefully not get tailed. And if he's getting tailed, he'll get wailed on for a while.
Yeah. Well, I've seen people with P38s in the game, so please post your insights and tell us what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know, because I've seen at least 2 sets of painted up P38s out there. So hopefully there's some insight there.
Yeah, let me tell you something. The community for this game has gone nuts. I have seen just about every aircraft, and it's the same old, oh, great, you have the Italian plane. What's the stats? Did that come out already? I mean, I know it's coming out because you shook it out of John.
Yes. Well, the good news is there's just so many of those that they've done the stats on, but they're still open to suggestions. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how things roll out. And even Andy has discussed the fact that he knows there's stats people aren't going to like because of the stat line compression, and that a lot of things are going to look similar to each other with different top end speeds and slightly different traits. But that's, once again, part of making this game play faster and be much more streamlined.
Yeah.
Just playable.
Yeah.
It's playable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm looking at the P38, man, and I don't know. I just think that the multi-engine and the confusion on how to play it just takes something away from it.
I wonder if a card mechanic could, for like an aircraft trait card for some of those. Like, I'm thinking about what you said about the Mosquito being such a fantastic climb rate. Seems like great climb by itself is not strong enough to account for that huge difference that aircraft may have had.
Right. So they took off what? They took off deep pockets and they gave it great climb. Is that?
Oh, sorry. We're talking about the Mosquito.
Yeah.
Took off, gave it great climb and heavy hitter.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that. I don't. It seems like great climb is not strong enough to account for that. The capability of that aircraft, that if you really want it to stand out as being something that could like break out of the fur ball just because of its climb rate, maybe a card that is unique to that, like a trait that's maybe unique just to that aircraft, something like, I don't know what you would call it, but something that accounts for its ability to, bust out a formation, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Not every twin engine plane is the same. And I think that's the problem maybe that they had when designing this is, They went with the 2-engine DO-17 Blenheim, in the initial box, and then they started adding these twin-engine planes. But if it walks like a duck, treat it like a fighter. And
I think a lot of that is the way it probably should be done, because I think you're raising a good point that it's multi-engine for the sake of being multi-engine.
Right. Like, well, you put multi-engine in there, and it's. What are they? The word that the community is going to say, hey, I don't know if you knew this, but the P-38 had 2 engines.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it was a very maneuverable fighter. It held its own. It was good at low altitude, high altitude. It let it play like a fighter. And I think that holds it back. And the same thing for the Mosquito. Different variants are going to have different traits, but it's not a bomber. And then, look at the case of the JU-88. You have 2 cards. You have the multi-engine bomber, and then you have the JU-88C, which is much better. And it's it was used to shoot down bombers. It was a night fighter too. But I mean, it's still not a maneuverable aircraft.
Well, I think when we use the term maneuverable, that raises the interesting point of, and I was looking at the Great Climb card, which is what made me think of this, that normally, except when certain cards are played, maneuverability is a defensive advantage in this game. Mm-hmm. That's the only time those numbers come up is when you have been forced to do something to not be defensive. In other words, someone is trying to outmaneuver you, so they make you add your agility. Someone is shooting at you, you add your agility. Only with great climb is when you're trying to do something offensive, i.e. climbing for advantage. A guy plays great climb on you, and now you have to use your aircraft's maneuver ability or your agility to make a maneuver check. So it's kind of I don't want to say it's a gap, but it's a point that sometimes maneuverability is very weighted towards the defensive capability rather than being able to have a highly maneuverable aircraft that either exits the fight, as we talked about, or is able to rapidly take advantage of another airplane. It's only seen as someone having less maneuverability rather than more maneuverability.
And you bring up something that I noticed a long time ago. Well, it's you look at maneuverability and great climb. The other one is tight turn.
Right.
But tight turn is scattered all over from maneuverability 2 aircraft to maneuverability 3. It's almost like it's not uniform. So
tight turn is a fascinating card because obviously starting to play as the RAF, tight turn was in my hip pocket there all the time for my Spitfires, and if you don't sit there and play out what tight turn does after multiple iterations, people may not appreciate how it kind of balances itself out. So for those who haven't played it, obviously, plane makes its normal 45-degree turn at any point in the movement, not just at the end. And where I think a lot of people use it is right at the very beginning. So you play tight turn that allows you to immediately take a 45-degree turn right off the bat, usually to threaten another airplane.
Right.
Fast roll, I think. There's a card, I think, that does that where it's just at the first of the turn. I think it's called fast roll.
That's rapid roll, I think.
Rapid roll,
yep.
Yeah.
And so generally that's where people try to use that card, because occasionally you can move forward and then take the 45 and now be in a tailing shot or in a tail arc shot, probably not a true tailing shot to point at the guy. But here's the funny thing. So if you play tight turn through 180 degrees a turn, it actually doesn't tighten your turn significantly. Right. It's kind of funny. So when you move the 4 times it takes to make your 180 degrees a turn, with tight turn, you're now kind of displaced behind, but your radius is only about half an inch to an inch less than normal.
Right.
So it's not like you gain a significant turn radius advantage, nor do you really get you actually get a little bit of a turn rate advantage. So that's what's kind of funny is you make it to being a beam your aircraft one move earlier, but you're still turned away by 45. So it's kind of hard to call it a turn rate advantage because you're not pointed directly back at 6 o'clock.
I think that card makes the RAF really fun to play. But
yes,
not easy to play.
Well, I think what it does is it gives you something that's extremely unique, forces you not to burn advantage, and in my opinion, plays well against the 109 and its advantages. But I have not tried it on any of the other aircraft that I see that have it because I haven't honestly played any of them. But it'll be interesting to see because I think I was looking at, I guess it was P40s. It was suggested the draft card. I think it has rapid roll on that one instead of tight turn. But there's some of the other ones that have that out there. So
P40 Warhawk.
Yep. I think, let me see what the draft card on that one said. I was just looking at that today.
And you guys saw that the Japanese box set's coming out soon.
Yes, well, more cards for me to buy.
I have one.
P40 was great dive and robust. It was not tight turn.
Oh, that makes sense.
What I looked at something today. Oh, it was great dive and rapid roll on the Spitfire Mark V with the clipped wings. That's where the rapid roll came in. So,
yeah, I'm looking at my cards now. Yep. Tight
and
turn,
of course, the Zero, the draft A6M card has both tight turn, deep pockets, and vulnerable. So that will be an interesting one to play.
I don't think the Japanese are ever going to lose that with the Zero. You design one bad airplane, you're screwed for life.
Yeah. Has to be classified as vulnerable.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just interesting. It's, just going through some of these things and hearing other people play with them. It's, there's so much more to this game than I think people realize. Maybe that's why we play it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem is if you don't break out of the basic aircraft, if you don't quickly go out and try some other things with either multi-engines like 110s, Mosquitoes, some of the other aircraft, you miss a little bit of that. And also, if you kind of keep playing the same scenarios that are in the book, I think you get lulled into a false sense of balance. And we saw it in a discussion that was had about, what's the right point values for MiG Alley. And people said, was it 600 points? Was it 750?
I saw that.
Yeah. And I think Brett and I, kind of our opinion is it's not a points thing playing MiG Alley, because the aircraft, I don't think right now, at least, are equitably pointed, because Rough Ride is such a pain in the ass for the MiG-15 player, right, Brett?
It is.
It is, yeah. You have to be prepared for some asymmetry in these missions, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so to do that, I have no problem flying 4v6 with the Sabres. The point values don't support that at all. Looking at the cards doesn't support that. But to me, just seeing how the dice have laid down on Rough Ride, it's been 50% of the time, Brett really needed to get that shot in or use that pilot action, and it didn't happen. So I think it's a very useful simulation. But what I think it means is people need to think, maybe we don't go points value wise. Maybe we try to simulate some of the tactics. And as I've talked about, force the MiGs to leave 2 of their guys in high cover. Only bring 4 on the table at the beginning, but there's 2 more MiGs just waiting in the wings there to jump in and ruin your day, which gives you time to have to make some tactical decisions about how you're going to how as the MiG player are you going to burn your advantage? Are you really going to try to tie it up, or are you going to flow through, let high cover drop in on turn 2, and try to ruin the rest of the fighter's day?
Yeah,
I like what you said about playing not only different aircraft, but maybe missions with multiple squadrons, or at least multiple elements that are coming in at different times with multiple deployment options. You got an element that's coming into high cover at a later point in the game. I think those are all elements that factors of the games that made them a lot more exciting and fun for us when we were really playing for like 2 days straight.
Well, and I think they are. And so that really leads me into kind of my first big tactics point to people is, most of the players out there, I get a feeling, think of the board edge, and I know we kind of were this way in our first 5 games or so. They think about the board edge as a hard wall. They don't think about how they can exploit the board edge or what happens when they cross the board edge, because it varies with scenario. And quite frankly, if you're playing a pickup game with your buddy, I think it's something you really ought to make sure that you're clear on, because there's times that it can be of great advantage, and there can times it's a line of death, as Brett saw in the escort battle. As the attacking fighters, you don't want to fly off the board. It's going to make your life difficult, because in that mission, leaving the battle area, you have to basically pass a maneuver check to re-enter the following turn. So it means there's an opportunity that you might not come back, and then if you do come back, you at least come back in from that board edge. But not every game plays that way, because when you take a look, when you go look at like Bounced, leaving the game, leaving the table area, it's permanent for that one. Yeah, you're done. You fly off the board, it's over. Looking at Fighter Sweep, it's different. You come back in high cover. So to me, that's a great advantage on that one, is that allows you to intentionally say, I want to get out of this fight. I'm going to remove myself, climb up to high cover, and then I can come back in at a time that is appropriate to me, because high cover doesn't have to come back in immediately. You can hang out up there for 2 turns, 3 turns, whatever, floats your boat. I think that tactical nuance gets lost on a lot of people, because they just go, well, they don't care about leaving the board edge till they're forced to leave the board edge by a maneuver. And they look over at the rules and go, well, what do I do now? That should be in your game plan from the beginning.
I'm trying to see if the board edge was talked about at all in the Q&A. I don't know.
I did not see any comments about it. So I didn't see any clarification. And to be honest, as we've started drafting some of our homebrew scenarios, I'm being very specific about which of the scenario board edge rules I use.
Could be
and
different
some of
each
them,
mission, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Some of them are permanent
Purposefully.
removal. You know, some of them, like in the checkerboards mission, where you're flying, F4Us trying to dodge MiG-15s, it's permanent removal. You fly off the board edge. That's good for you as an F4 player. That's bad for you as a MiG-15 player.
Right.
It's one of those things of manage your energy, manage your maneuver, because when you're gone, you're gone. Kind of like how the bounced scenario went. And then, likewise, there's a couple of them where it's a thoroughly asymmetric answer, where if you're the F-51s and you leave the board, you're out of the game. But if you're the MiG, you leave the board. Hey, come back to high cover, find another set of F-51s to beat up on, and drop in from high cover at your next opportunity. So I think if people pay a little more attention to that, it will create some better starting decisions, and they won't be afraid of playing towards the board edge, because they will have taken into account, whether leaving is good for them, whether it's a risk, or does everybody kind of drive to the center of the board and fight it out there?
Well, it goes to how you set up and it just the type of players you have. So here's a question, because I know you wanted to talk about setup. Have you guys only played 1v1 as far as players?
We've played 2v2 is the only other way we don't. 1v1 and 2v2. And it's been interesting, some tweaks that we found based on that.
Yeah, I noticed that too with the 2v2s, because it's the best way to demo a game with a lot of people.
Right.
But it's how you start and how you set up, and talking tactics with your partner is so important. As far as covering, high cover, I find it very interesting. And the other thing is I can get more people to sit down and play the game and pick it up.
Right. Well, Brett, we played a number of 2v2s. What did you see for not just tactics, but kind of keeping the game going and not getting bogged down? What were some of the things that we kind of had to keep in people's minds?
Well, we had some of those 2v2s. It was their first game, so we had the cheat sheet out for just the sequence of pilot action and everything.
Yeah. That's what I always remember. So there was a lot of when you double the number of players, you double the number of opportunities to accidentally move out of order, because somebody's in the middle of an engagement, they moved their advantage 4, and the neutral 4 right next to him. You're like, I want to move that guy. Nope. Not his turn. It's the advantage 3 across the board.
I think we kind of separated the table too, so that even though we were 2v2,
I think the games ended up separating themselves that way, because we didn't deploy that far apart. But it was obvious that everybody was kind of on slightly different game plans. And then in the last game that we played, I was totally in high cover, because I remember on that one, I think it was you were playing the 109s, I seem to remember. And I know we had a couple other aircraft out there, and my whole game was spend 3 turns moving up and down the board edge until somebody made the mistake of turning tail on within 6 inches. And then I dove out of high cover and proceeded to punish them for that.
Yeah, I'm still looking through the cards here about the thing we were just talking about.
Well, and so we'll talk real quick about the high cover mechanic that I think sometimes people go, well, why does high cover move up and down the board, and why would you do that? To me, it is as much of a wingman as your wingman on the board. Now, he's not going to stop you from being tailed, but what's going to happen is if you find yourself out there where the rest of the fight is starting to mass on you, just kind of draw everything over to where your high cover is. And I know it worked out well for Brett and I in that the guys that were chasing down the ME-109s kind of drifted over there, turned tail onto my marker, not being really cognizant of what was going to happen, and some ME-110s popped out of high cover. But the fact is, even if I hadn't maneuvered them on the board, they should have honored that marker. They should have said, well, I may not want to chase this 109 because that's going to make me turn tail on. Let me, take a 45-degree turn the other way, and at least not give the high cover a chance to come on the board and take a tail on shot. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about initial setups. One of the things I want to talk about, along with using the board edge, is setups. And Mitch, I know you'd brought up some points to that. So there's a few things that have changed in that the distances for setup normally is 18 inches. And then there's now a little bit of a discussion in at least the Balmer scenario of moving that out to 21. And some people have also said, hey, with jets, is no closer than 18 inches still a valid way to set up? So I don't know what you've seen with 18 inches.
I've been playing the jets on much bigger. So I have a 4x4 naval mat.
Right.
And I've been playing it on those, or even bigger. And it's just so you get the feel of those fast maneuverable jets. And, it's painful to watch players merge because that's what they do. They just go head on. Just to watch the maneuver on the bigger table with more experienced players, I kind of like it. So especially playing with the jets, I've been house ruling and playing with bigger tables.
Right. We've been playing it on 4x4, and it hasn't been terrible. We played it a couple times on 4x6 just to try some lengthwise setups. And I'll be honest, even with the higher speeds, sometimes it was painful on a 4x6 table if you were playing long ways. You felt like it was taking a while to get to the merge. So we did that once. We're like, that's not really what we were looking for. We went back to 4x4. But what we realized was that it worked out fine if you managed your speed. And so I think this is something that people don't necessarily do either in the propeller era or in the jet era. They really, and I'll jokingly say, they Warhammer it. They point right at the other dude. They charge into close combat range and then try to get into a turning dog. And the problem with that is when you do that with an 18-inch setup, even with a propeller airplane, you're inside of a gunshot when both sides move to their first maximum move. Mm-hmm. So you've kind of taken away your opportunity to make any wingman maneuvers, any kind of setup, and as a result, you get in this very interesting head-on argument that people have of, well, how do I take a head-on shot because probably everybody's climbed up and is advantaged, or the one guy says, well, I started off disadvantaged. The other guy was 18 inches in front of me and advantaged. There's nothing I can do, quote unquote, which is where I tell them, slow down the intercept. Don't go 7. Go your half speed. So go 4 in this case, take a turn away. And they go, well, why would I want to turn away? Because I'm just now, I can't shoot him back on a head-on shot. And I go, well, that's fine. You're also minimizing your chance of losing any advantage because now you have a deflection shot that he's taking. So sure, you can't shoot back, but you probably couldn't. You didn't have good odds to do damage to him. And then, as you think about it, if one aircraft can turn away and the other aircraft can fly different speeds, now you're setting up that wingman opportunity. So if you make a turn away and in the second turn somebody moves 7, somebody moves 4, now there's a 3-inch gap. You're building that wingman cover to prevent somebody from tailing you. And so I think 18 is a good number. I tell you, I like 21. My board probably isn't big enough. The problem is, as we go to 21, it starts pushing you out to that edge of the 4-inch board, or meaning whoever gets set up in the center of the board doesn't have a whole lot of maneuvering room. They really can't spread out their forces.
Well, I don't know. It's just from watching players and novice players set up, you have to hold your tongue saying, I don't know if I would do that. But I notice as players play it the second and third time, they start setting up better. They think about the wingman effect quite a bit. And the other one I noticed too is they don't take front end shots.
Exactly.
I mean, it's that bloodlust. They lose it because it's never a really good proposition.
It really isn't. And that's what we want. Now, the fact of the matter is, sure, real world, there were a lot of opportunities for head-on gunshots. And if somebody's going to make a close aboard pass with you, make it painful for them and take a shot. But the fact of the matter is, when we look at it purely in game mechanics, initiating that head-on shot is not always worth it for you because there are fairly good odds you'll take a boom chit if it's not a low skill pilot.
Right.
Or the dice aren't against him. If he's a 3 or a 2 with anything over firepower 1, the odds, or sorry, 3 or 2 with anything firepower 1, the odds are probably not in his favor. But as soon as you start putting a head-on shot against a skill 4, skill 5, firepower 2, or firepower 3, you're taking a boom chit, and you could be taking a critical hit and losing an advantage level. So,
yeah,
be careful what you wish for.
But I mean, look, you line up any 2 gamers face to face, they want to take the shot.
They do, but once again, that's where, at least for me, I try to shoehorn the real world experience in with how the game works, and that's why. And Brett probably got tired of seeing me do it every single time that he would charge at me with his BF 109s, and I just take a slight turn away. And Brett's like, "What are you doing?" But the difference was, sure, he might have a quick deflection shot, but as soon as he tried to get in and tail somebody, there's at least 2 other fighters in there blocking whatever he can do. So
and you always had a wingman in good position. Yep.
Yeah, and you only get that by taking some kind of spacing maneuver. So that means guys flying at different speeds, different angles, to just build that separation. And part of that as well is one of the subjects I'll kind of preach to. So if you don't own a copy of the book Fighter Combat, go out there and buy it, and then you'll go, Doug, what does this book have to do with the game? It doesn't tell me how to win the game. Well, no kidding. Remember, I said the game is an approximation, but you learn to start thinking about things like exclusive use turning room. And, Mitch and I remember that from our dogfighting days where we'd think about all those painful setups where one guy comes to the merge down on the deck and the other guy can't turn any further down because otherwise he hits the ground. Well, you run into the same situation with, once again, the board edge, kind of like we talked about why you need to understand your board edge. There's some times in there that if you, in your initial setup, choose to kind of lean over to one of those board edges rather than putting it at your 6 o'clock and running straight in, that gives you an ability to keep turning when your opponent can't. Because if he moves his full movement, he'll run off the board. And I know Brett about lost his mind when I did that to him in one of the MiG versus F-86 games, because it's really frustrating because you're looking at this fighter that you want to get in there and tail, and you go, I can't even make my minimum maneuver or minimum move without going off the board. So I'm going to burn advantage not to fly off the board.
Right.
And And so I know, I'm sorry that I painted you in that corner a couple times, Brett, but that is another one of those points of understanding concepts like exclusive use turning room. Was what it meant was you had to burn advantage, and I could just make a 45-degree turn. And now we're both pointed away from the board edge, but you are now at a lower advantage state, and you're within 9 inches of me, so you can't climb as a jet v jet kind of situation. So I think people can think about that as a little bit more advanced tactic out there for working the setup and working their maneuvers. Don't always feel like you got to fly right at the center of the board.
And I hate to say this because I'm going to be dogging a lot of other games that, of course, we all play. It's the only game where I can actually point to using real tactics, real fighter tactics actually work in a game.
Yeah. And the nice thing is it works, and it's not a energy, climb rate, afterburner position tracking game. And I hate to pick on the guys for Check Your Six because I think it's a cool game, but it's not to even that middle level of detail, much less something like Air War or some of the other ones that really were to that level where everybody had a data card that was an 8.5 by 11 sheet just for that airplane. All right. Well, awesome, guys. Thanks for taking the time tonight. I know we've kind of been all over the page. So we'll see how this one gets turned into a podcast and maybe turned into separate little vignettes to be woven in there. But there certainly is a lot of tactical depth, as we've talked about. There's a lot of things you need to consider. So if you're a Blood Red Skies player out there and your game seems strangely like Warhammer 40K, but with airplanes, take some time, push the planes around the table by yourself, see how they maneuver, and try something different in your next game. Take a turn away from the fight, turn closer to the board edge, maybe intentionally fly something other than your max airspeed straight at the enemy, and see if it gives you some ideas on how you can show up to that next engagement at a position of advantage, denying them the head-on shots, and then using that to be able to be something that you can exploit to be a follow-on advantage.
Yeah. And I'll throw one last thing in there. It's, hey, community, show us what the meta is for this game, because I haven't figured it out yet.
I will laugh when you say that and go, and then we're going to have to ask the question about all the competitive players.
Yeah, I want to see a meta.
Competitive players ruining it. Yeah, no, I agree, and I don't think anyone really knows what it is. Hopefully, it's not Defiance, a squadron full of Defiance flying across the board trying to ruin things for you.
No, I think it's gonna be twin engine planes.
Yeah, it might very well.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks a bunch. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good to talk with you, Mitch.
And thank you guys for inviting me again. I will speak to you guys soon.
Absolutely.